Hey there, friends. We need to talk about jam bands today. And first of all, I'd like to apologize. I've been trying to be a little more frequent and reliable with the videos that I post, but I had a little busy start of the summer here since teaching died down, and I had to took a little. I went a few places, went to Wyoming, then back to New York, had a few things over here. Then I took a little road trip with my dad. We've been meaning to do that for a long time. We drove from New York to Nashville, Tennessee. It's a few stops along the way, a place called Winchester, Virginia, then Louisville, Kentucky, a little stop at the Corvette Museum on the way down in Nashville. Then we got to Nashville, got to know the place. It was super wonderful. I might throw some pictures up here. A fun town. I had some friends that relocated there. Pianist John Coward, bassist Kevin Scott, and the drummer Marlon Patton. We did a few gigs, which was a lot of fun. I also reconnected to an old friend of mine, John Wood, drummer, great drummer, that I met at Berkeley. Met a new friend called Alec Noonan, great bass player. We played the Underdog, which is a cool, super awesome kind of divey, bar. From what I understand, is the place that I think Guthrie Trapp does have a residency there, or used to have one. Then we hit Rudy's Jazz Room, which was awesome. Rudy's is terrific. If you're ever in Nashville, I do recommend checking them out. We had a blast playing there. Got back to New York, shaved, as you can probably see if you watched any of the other videos. Every now and then in the summer, it's nice to let the skin breathe a little bit. Well, now I'm back in New York, back in the grind, playing some gigs coming up, and thought I'd get back into doing the video thing. And something just occurred to me as I was in Nashville. Started thinking about jam bands, which they've become such a thing, and I think they've always been a part of my life, and I sort of had a complicated relationship with jam bands and the whole jam music, I guess, circuit or artists, Sip my coffee. When I started really getting into classic rock and progressive rock and fusion and other things, and started studying jazz, and that's, kind of how I built my career, being a jazz musician. And, oh, is that gonna fall again? Hope not. Actually, gonna put this down. So got into jazz, started studying jazz and getting deep into improvisation. And, the subject of jam bands started coming up back again. I started discussing things with a bunch of new, musicians that I hung around with, which were part of that scene as well. So that music became super kind of relevant to me again, and it made me want to check some stuff out. I realized I didn't really have a take on the Dead, or the Grateful Dead, that kind of music, which I guess is considered I think it's fair to say is sort of the quintessential jam band, or what we started to address as a jam band. I actually looked it up, and I was like, where does that term come from? And not only that, but I was thinking, would it be fair to say, because I'm gonna go out and say here, put my flak jacket on, that I'm not a Grateful Dead fan. I was never huge into their music, and I think, the Grateful Dead is sort of an undeniable force in culture in general, right? So I remember one time don't worry, I'll get back to subject. These videos are supposed to be kind of like conversational, so, bear with me here. I remember, checking out some Dead and not really being into it, kind of just really not my thing. At that point, I was probably at the height of my jazz, pretentiousness. I was listening to all straight ahead, kind of like 50, post bop and some contemporary stuff and some bebop and all that. My mind wasn't really super permeable to things like that. So I would say, I saw this, I checked it out, kind of dismissed it, and then I saw this Onion, I don't think it was the Onion, it was some sort of meme or a joke thing. This is probably getting on for 10 years ago, I don't know. But it was saying, all Grateful Dead albums rated, and they're all rated the worst. And being in that mindset back then, I was like, oh, this is hilarious. And then I just posted it on Facebook, right? And then a lot of people kind of got upset about it. And I understand, I mean, listen, the Grateful Dead probably could take the joke. I think the thing is, there's such a powerful cultural manifestation. Their music is so, like, the Grateful Dead's not going anywhere. So they can probably, like, you can make fun of them. It doesn't matter, like, what I think or what that article is making fun of. But, you know, people that I really respect, their opinions, like, they were kind of like, oh man, you know, this is kind of a, you know, a shallow take and this and that. So it became very clear to me that a lot of people whose opinions I really respect, people, great musicians who I really like, love the Grateful Dead and their music. So I think I owed it to myself to really check them out. You know what I mean? Like, be like, okay, there's something there. There's got to be, because, you know, they withstood the test of time. The music's been there, and they I think in my mind, they sort of brought up this whole movement of jam bands and sort of what came around based off of, like, I guess we could say, we'll get to the bands later actually. Let me stick to the point here. So I was like, okay, let's start checking that sort of music out, you know, and I started going back and really listening to the Grateful Dead, watch the documentaries, you know what I mean, I believe it's called Strange Trip or something. There's a couple of different ones. They're all extremely well done. You know, I started finding out more about Jerry Garcia, who he was, and the whole band around them, and sort of how they began in San Francisco and the acid tests and all that stuff. All very relevant to a period in time and to a moment in American culture, I think. And that stuff is important. It does matter, you know what I mean? But as much as I like to say, you know, it's enough, but it's not really enough. I really had to get a feel for the music. So I really started listening to their songs and such. Not only that, I started looking back at my own musical upbringing and learning, right? And I realized way back in the day, some of the most important influences that I have and some of the most important formative sounds and music that I liked would be considered jam bands. For example, the Allman Brothers band. Live at Fillmore East was a huge record for me. Huge, absolutely huge. I only now looking back, I can sort of see how strong their influence was just in my music. I think as I studied a lot of like deep improvisation and getting into jazz really deeply and sort of like really learning all the mechanisms and understanding harmony and all this stuff, it became more and more as I became more learned in music, it became harder and harder for me to sort of get on board with extended improvisations in a music that is not necessarily that. You know what I'm saying? Like, I started liking my rock simpler and more honest and less sort of pretentious, and my jazz kind of more, you know, complex and in there. So I think it's really tricky to find bands and musicians that really ride that line really well. What do I mean by that? Like, it's tricky. Once, you know, maybe a band has really strong songs and all that, but once they start improvising within it, it's very hard for them to get lost and get a little bit just not in. It seems like a facsimile of something that they were influenced by, but not really the real thing. And I really think the Allman Brothers is one of those bands that really found a way to sort of codify a language that works within their music that just kills it. I think, you know, you see Duane, Allman, you know, Greg. I'm going to talk about the first. You know, they had several iterations, of which I love many. But if you talk about the Fillmore East band, like the main soloists there, like, you know, Dickey and Greg and Duane, like, but not to do any disservice to the rest of the band, but those are the guys that stretched the longest and kind of really were the main soloists. And of course, everybody was improvising together. But I could, you know, we could do a video just on the Allman Brothers. Maybe we should. But anyway, those guys were so good at adapting that sort of, you know, Duane is famous for saying that he was checking out a lot of like Coltrane and Miles and Dickey too and all that. But I think those guys were really good at adapting that language to their music, but also staying on point and really sound. Their feel was good. Their ideas were good. They developed really well. I never felt to me like I was missing something, like, oh, I wasn't there, you know what I mean? Whereas some people, you just sort of feel like it's like almost there, but it's not quite, and it just sort of feels not great. Sorry if I'm being a little abstract, but it's an abstract concept that I'm trying to explain. They also had a strong rhythm section. The tunes were strong, they're tight, they swung. Allman Brothers is something that I think, yeah, just really no notes. Those guys were really killer. And then eventually they would, you know, bring us, you know, Weir and Haynes. I mean, I'm skipping a little bit of the years there, but just saying that, like, because I want to connect to another band that was really massive for me, which was Gov't Mule. And now, dude, it's a huge honor for me to play with Captain Scott that plays with Gov't Mule, but also an amazing bass player in different, you know, groups and all that. I never thought, I remember when I was a kid, you know, lately, someone gave me a burned CD. I don't remember what it was back in the day, like, you know, early 2000s more likely, actually. No, yeah, or definitely early 2000s to mid 2000s, of the Aquarium Rescue Unit, which featured Jimmy Herring on guitar. The, you know, Colonel Bruce Hampton, which was like, back in the day, I didn't know what to make of Bruce Hampton. It was just such an odd band, and the way he presented himself, he sort of came off to me as sort of a Zappa-esque kind of character. He seemed more like a just an idea guy, a spiritual kind of guy that would just sort of guide the band. A Miles Davis-ish like character, you know what I'm saying? That like, it wasn't so much about his playing or it was about his energy and what he brought to the musicians that he worked with that seemed to be really special. And that kind of confirmed it, you know what I mean? I didn't even know who was in the band. I knew it was Jimmy Herring on guitar, because I think whoever gave me the CD just told me that, oh, this guy is incredible, his name is Jimmy Herring. And like, this is pre-YouTube, I couldn't really get videos of him. I remember seeing articles on Guitar Player sometimes of Jimmy's. All the different, and I just remember the playing being unreal. Just like the solos he would take were insane, you know. Special mention for No Eagles Underwater, that has just the tightest, most well thought out solo, you know, in that sort of rock kind of funky context. It's running like chromatic approaches, just some bop-ish kind of lines, and killing technique is a fast tempo, and his chops are like right there. That solo is like a masterclass, and that's sort of like if you were to say jam band, like, because it's completely like a rock kind of funky context, but Jimmy is just throwing down, adding all this information, and it never gets, it's always super tasteful, and never gets to be pretentious and sort of like a jazz guy trying to play rock. Because I'm actually going to add this to this too. I think I've worked with a ton of like being you know, I built my career, most of my stuff playing jazz, which I still love. Is, you know, it's my life pretty much. I've also, one of my gripes is meeting jazz musicians that think they can play pop or rock or, you know, blues just because they can play jazz, which is a very complex art form. And that's not true at all. Like, I think every one of these styles and music is as complex as the next. And for you to get every single idiosyncrasy of that style takes a whole lot of getting in depth, you know what I mean? So I've definitely seen like jazz guys try to, you know, sort of wing their way into those things. It just doesn't sound great, you know what I mean? Although there are like jazz guys that have a deep appreciation for that music that you can tell, like kill, you know, for example, like I could just mention off the cuff, like Brett Meldo. You can tell that dude, even though he figured out bop when he was probably 20, he has a real love and care for pop music and songwriters, and you can hear it. You can hear in his music when he plays pop music. It has a particular idiom, he phrases into it, even if he uses his, you know, wealth of harmonic devices. You know, it always sounds pertinent and good. And Jimmy, you know, I know he studied at MI, I believe, but he's always seemed to me like super connected to both sides. I don't think he ever did, you know, I mean, one of the, well, let's say, I mean, I was gonna say, I don't think he ever did any straight ahead like jazz projects. I don't think he ever wanted to be like a jazz player. But there was this other album around that time called Jazz is Dead, which was these guys playing Grateful Dead music, which again, we're returning to the Dead now, in an instrumental setting. And Jimmy Herring was playing guitar. Billy Cobham was playing drums on, I think Alphonso Johnson was on bass, and Rod Morgenstein on keys. I'm gonna, if I'm incorrect, I'm gonna look it up and I'll put the information either here or here, somewhere in the video. Yeah, I love those. Blue Light Rain, and the second one was, again, I'll put both albums here. And the reason why I don't remember that is because I couldn't find those. I mean, I was in Brazil, like those records, I couldn't get them. So I had them in CDR. Someone just burned them for me. And so I never really checked out the liner notes or it was, you know, things were tricky. This is going on for 20 years ago. And like things were tricky to get a hold of, especially in Brazil in those days. Today, I could just Google it off of YouTube right now and it's there. But I remember just listening to these records endlessly, you know, like I knew of the songs Scarlet Begonias and Dark Star, you know, Crazy Fingers, all those because of those albums. The Jazz is Dead, the Jazz is Dead. Now there's a different Jazz is Dead, but let's not get into that. Anyway, listening to Jimmy play on those projects and just Billy Cobham, who I knew from the Mahavishnu Orchestra, was just awesome. That playing was really great, and now Jimmy is on Widespread Panic. So even though, like, you know, I was gonna say, like, am I jazziest? I would say, like, oh man, you know, jam bands, not my thing, not my bag. Not true, because at the same time, you know, I was super into the Allman Brothers Band, Gov't Mule, Jazz is Dead, the Aquarium Rescue Unit. Those bands were like incredibly formative for me, like super part of my growing years as a musician and trying to get into. They certainly helped me be more into contemporary jazz and these kinds of things, and also find, you know, ways in which the guitar would fit within those contexts, like the electric guitar in a more soloistic way that would ride the line. You know what I mean? It didn't have to be Benson, Grant Green, Wes, Joe Pass, and it didn't have to be like Kurt Rosenwinkel, Bill Frisell, John Scofield. It could ride the line in a certain way, using guitar vocabulary, but also improvising within more adventurous contexts and stretching and being able to, you know, blend both. You know what I mean? And all that is super great. You know, I guess mentioning John Scofield too. He's a guy that's been, you know, featured. Sco. He's a case that needs to be studied. We need to make a video just about John Scofield, because he's a guy that's always been able to like come in and out of all the different contexts in so many ways. Like Sco is just such a bad dude that, you know, you see his solo work, his straight ahead stuff, his funky stuff, his jam stuff. You know, we got the Uber jams and such. But even maybe put a go-go, because like on that he's got Medeski, Martin and Wood playing with him. But that album is just such a. I've been playing a few of Sco's go-go songs in my trio sets, because they're just such a nice bass to sort of improvise over and have fun with other musicians. You know what I mean? They're simple, they're tasteful. They kind of you can go more jazz-like on it. You can go a little more rock. It all works, and that's the thing that I think Sco really thrives on. He's also played with Gov't Mule a lot, but it became this thing. I realized just how much I was sort of like neglecting jam bands and refusing to even sort of acknowledge them very much. You know, I was thinking about that and I realized, man, actually jam bands were a huge part of my musical upbringing and education, and it'd be unfair to sort of like, you know, just scratch them out, you know. And so I went back, you know, returning to the beginning. I went after the Dead and I started like really checking them out and checking out, you know, Jerry Garcia and Bob Weir and everybody else, and figuring out what, you know, what is it about them, you know. And Jerry, I think probably, if anything, still not being a huge Grateful Dead fan, but also understanding. The first and foremost thing I would say after taking a deep dive into the Dead is that they have some really great songs. And that's something that's huge for me, probably one of the most important things. Songs is where it's at. If your songs aren't quite there, it's very hard to grab interest, to sort of interest people. I think, you know, there's so many guitar players that I love, up online, and dude, this guy sounds great. But then you go check the album out, and there's just no songs. It's just weak, and I'm like, man, I wish this guy someone could just get him the good songs, and he would just, all that playing that the person can pull off would just be flourish within a good environment. You know what I'm saying? Like maybe that's one of the things that Jimmy Page was great at. Led Zeppelin was great because of the songs they created at that point, with all the playing. The Grateful Dead has some really great songs that I've grown to become like really, really a fan of. Even if I'm not a huge fan of other things, particularly how they play these songs and their particular way of playing rhythm. I think it's something that I struggle with sometimes. But it doesn't matter. I mean, Jerry himself, like as a guitar player, like a few students asked me to like teach them some Jerry stuff, and I had to check it out to teach them basically. And I just realized he's a crafty guitar player, and sort of like what he's doing in a way, it's similar somehow a little bit, because I don't want to reduce things to their lowest common denominator, but in a way it's sort of similar to jazz in the sense that he's approaching the songs trying to play melodically from the chord changes of the song, and even if the chord changes are simpler, which is the case sometimes with Grateful Dead songs. I mean, definitely simpler than jazz standards or jazz compositions, but he is playing thinking about the chord change, which is really interesting, and he's really gifted at being melodic while playing within the chord change. You see some triadic things, pentatonic scales, some blues vocabulary. All that is like really interesting, and he's really good at weaving that within those improvisations. The other thing is like something that like Galera, is like, I like his tone a lot. Like he's got a really bright, thin is not the way, it's a fat, but it's bright tone that a lot of people said he played a lot with the middle pickup on the Strat, and then on the other, on Wolf and eventually Tiger and all those Olympic guitars that just had a bunch of controls and all that stuff. I checked some of that out, all the active preamps and all that stuff, but it seemed to me like he really had a very specific sort of like sound to it that the camera should pick this up a little bit, like just that sort of like. That sort of like really bright tone, but you know what I mean? Like bright but very thick, and it's just kind of present. And mute this for a second. Yeah, I really started getting really into that. The sort of the way he plays that, the way he plays time. It comes a little bit, I think, from sort of his bluegrass origins and all that stuff. So, my take on jam bands is like, yeah, it's not all of it is for me, but there's a lot of it that I really love. And it gave me some of the most important references that I have for guitar playing, just improvisation, being, Duane, Allman, Dickey, Betts, Warren Haynes, Jimmy Herring. And I guess, as we get more specific, which I certainly did, I always tell people I never set out to be like a jazz guitar player. It was just sort of the way I found to connect to music and to really learn music and to be able to find an outlet for my compositions. It became this sort of jazz thing, and nowadays it's been changing. But as you become more specific, I think we should also strive not to close the door on other things that could be incredible just because of a certain identity or group associated with it, and maybe some superficial knowledge of what that could be. For example, I was just dismissing jam bands because I was going from like preconceived notions without any sort of like actual studying or understanding. So I was like, no, that's ignorant. I should check it out for sure. And then once again, I was like, I should have been on this way earlier because of all the stuff that I listened to in my teens and early 20s. You know what I mean? All that stuff was already there. And some of the most amazing music that I've heard definitely came from that stuff. So I think that's my little spiel on jam bands, and do definitely hope to play more of that stuff and kind of connect more to that scene because it's pretty wonderful. And yeah, that's what I got. Leave your comments below. Like and subscribe. Like if you like, subscribe if you like to subscribe. Leave me your comments about jam bands that I might not know. or a jam band that I might know, and why am I wrong about whatever I said? But anyway, it's all in good fun and love of music. Again, if you're a hardcore lover of the Grateful Dead, that is totally fine. You know, it does it for this. That's amazing. I think I'm a somewhat fan of the Dead. I'm a liker of the Dead, maybe not a lover, but that's all right. Nobody has to, you know, love the same stuff. I do recognize their importance and the importance of other jam bands that are very much in that idiom. You know, I would say I'm definitely a huge Allman Brothers fan. I'm a huge Gov't fan. I'm a huge, you know, Choir and Rescue Unit fan, and Jimmy Herring in general. But yeah. Anyway, leave your opinions below. Tell me what's up, and I'll see you on the next video. We got some gear demos coming up pretty soon if you're into that stuff, and some other spiel stuff. We got some playing videos up on the channel. If you see, he never plays in the videos. There's videos of playing recent. You can check them out. Please do. Tell your friends. And yeah, I'm just kidding around, and I'll see you soon. Thank you very much for watching, as always. Till the next one.